Hey, Matt, and welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Building a CRM with UIFlow and Xano. I'm joined by the lovely Matt. Welcome back, Matt. Good to
Yeah,
have you here again.
always good to be here.
So today's session, we're continuing building on with our CRM we built last time. And today we're going to add a whole range of different permissions. And in particular, we're going to focus on role-based access today. So we're going to show you how to first configure your Xano database to be able to add roles and create a table for that. We're then going to set up how to then show that additional information for a user inside of UIFlow. And we're then going to build a function that's going to allow us to check a user's role in each of our APIs and workflows we build in Xano. And then we're going to have Matt build the front end to have some conditional logic show different front end buttons and components based on a user's role. So we'll overall be able to control the app based on a user's role. So without too much more, I'll jump in to start the fun part, building. First things first, to kind of get this set up, what we're going to do is we need to show you how we've got our database set up. So being a CRM, previously we've dealt with contacts and deals. We've added a new table now for role, which is going to be linked to our user table because each user contains a role or has a role. And inside of our role table, we've created a few basic roles. So admin, user, manager. We've given each of these different roles a permission value based on just 1 to 3, because then we can create some logic in the future based on this value here, saying if your permission is higher than the required number, we can then easily grant them access to a particular function. So firstly, you'll need to set up this role table where you can add your different roles with a name and a text value, and then the permission actually as an integer. And you need to make sure that you create the relationship in your user table as well. You'll see here, you can do that by essentially just adding a table relationship in your user table, and then obviously making sure you apply the correct role to the user that you want. What we're then going to do as well is part of that previous session, we set up the login and authentication in UIFlow. And one of the default endpoints that we use to get data from a user is our auth.me endpoint. So what we'll do with our auth.me is essentially we're going to dress up or add on some additional information to this call. So how we can do that is currently we've just got our get record request in our auth.me endpoint. And what we need to do is we can, because we've created a table relationship with our user table and our role table, we can actually, without needing to do an additional request to our database, from our get record step, we can actually add on information from another table because we've created that table relationship. So how we can do that is by clicking the add-on button. And I'll create a new add-on for this one, which is going to be the role of the user. And in this circumstance, each user only has one role. So it's going to return a single item. And the matching ID, which we've now seen in our user table, is we've got the role ID that exists in our user table. So we're going to use that as the matching identifier. So we now add this. I'm going to dress up the name of it just to remove that underscore. So it's role. And what that's going to do is if we now request a user from this auth.me endpoint, and we can test this with Matt. What this is going to do for us is it's now going to, like we know, Xano is automatically going to exchange the user's authentication token to give us who the user ID is. We've now returned the user ID. We've also attached onto it their role. So Matt being an admin with a permission value of 3. If I then publish this, this will then update the changes live for Matt on the front end that he can use. But in addition to the user's information, the role, we also want to include some information about the company they work for as well. One of the beauties of the add-ons is you're not just linked to having one add-on. You can add an add-on within my role table. I can also then add another add-on to our user table. So we can get some nested kind of add-ons happening. And as your queries and your logic expands, you can have some pretty long advanced add-ons to kind of really dress up your responses. And the idea is we're doing this in an efficient way. So instead of having to contact multiple tables, we're kind of doing that in a sly way where we do one request and kind of add on some additional information. So we can also do the same with a company where we can add it via the company ID. And I'm just going to remove this underscore. we now have both the role of the user and then also the company that they're associated to, noting that both company and role are from a separate table to the user. If we run this again, just to make sure it's working, we can now see Matt, his role, and which company he works for. And even a nice description of the company as well. So
Awesome.
If I publish this, this is now live and accessible on the front end by Matt. We did have 2 of these set up. That's because I was just practicing offline to make sure I could do it properly. So now that we have that set up, what we're also going to do is we're going to set up a function. And this function is essentially going to allow us to quickly and easily add a check to any of our APIs or functions. So the reason why we're using a function here is the functions are reusable pieces of business logic. So that means each time we set up an API and we want to add user validation to it, instead of having to rewrite the function each time, we can simply just paste in the custom function. And you'll see we set up in a way that, depending on what the API is, we can create different permission levels for that. So at a very high level, what we're going to build here is essentially a function. We're going to have some inputs at the top here. We're going to do a request to our user table, to our role table, and we're going to use some conditional logic to then basically be able to give us a true or false if the user has permission to access this function. Okay, so we're going to create a fresh function here so we can walk through it step by step. And remember, this is a function. So this is going to be able to be inserted into an API or a task or even another function. So we need to, the way a function works is essentially it has the inputs that we can give it from our API or other function. And then it's going to give us an output as well, which we can then use the output with any of those APIs that we're working with. So as a starting point, being a checking a user permissions function, we're first going to get the user's ID, which generally we can receive again as that special ID, auth ID, which is a special environment variable when we have authentication enabled for an API. So we're going to pass the user's ID in, and then we need to know what is the permission that's actually required for this particular API. And because we want this function to be reusable, we're going to actually set all of the potential options as a choice within the function. So a good way to set a predefined list of options is an enum. And we're going to this to be the permission level required. This will be a single, and we can actually predefine the values that we want here. So we have an admin, we have a manager. Was it a manager or a supervisor, Matt? We have a user.
It was the manager. You got it right.
Perfect. Suspended. We had deactivated. So now when we're actually inputting an item, we'll be able to select the essential option that's required as part of our inputs. Now, what we're going to do is, because we've now got who the user is and what permission levels required, we need to then work out what access do they have. So the first thing we do is we're going to do a database request to get the user. And the user, we need to remember that this will be the user ID of the input. But we also need to work out what role this user has. So remembering that that's on a separate table, we can see here that we can actually do an add-on here. And actually, what we might do first is we might just remove some of the irrelevant information that we don't require. So I'm going to get rid of these auth items. And this is a good way to also make your calls more efficient as well. If you have additional information that's not required, we can just basically tidy up the response that we're getting from our get record step. And then that's now cleaned up. I can now add on the role, which we did that add on just a moment ago. Which good habit to do is if we want to test these items, we can see we've now got Matt coming through and we've now got this role available. Now that we know the user and in Matt's position there, Matt has a admin access and he has a permission value of 3. So we now need to understand what is the permission level required for this function. And in this one, we might choose that it's an admin, but we also want to set this up so it could be variable. So we need to check that what is the value of the selected permission. And we can do that by basically creating a lookup to our role table. And we can actually change what we want to search for in any of our get record requests. So the only value that we have here is the name of the permission. And this is going to match the permission level required. So now when we search based on what the user selected when they're setting up the check in the APIs, it can then pull the relevant role and then check to see, we'll make a check to see if the user has a higher permission value. So let's check to see if this one works as well. We're going to have the output this time be the role. And we're going to search based on the permission level required. So 1, and the permission level is going to be admin. We can now see that we've been able to pull the admin record and there'll be a permission value of 3. So we've got all the information that we now require. So we can now create a conditional bit of logic to determine what output are we going to receive, either a yes or no. So in data manipulation, we can go to conditionals, and we're going to create a condition where the user ID, the user 1 dot role dot permission level. And we can check this by having a look at what's our output. So if we check our output again, we've got our user _1 variable here. We've then got an object is a role, and then the permission value is actually the item that we're after. So if we check this again, permission value is going to be the correct pathway to identify the user's permission value. And we want to say if the user's permission value is equal or greater than the role ID of what we've just found, the role, this is going to be dot permission value. What we can then do is if the user's permission is equal to or higher than, we're going to perform an action. And if it isn't, we can then perform a separate action. So then is going to be our successful action. So we can create a variable, which is going to be the result. And let's create our own custom object. So we're going to have some key value pairs so we can house some information in there. So we're going to start by creating an object. And within that object, I want to set a key value pair. So the key might be the result, and this value is going to be true. That's a success. And we can even then create maybe a message as well to kind of give some information if someone's not familiar with the function. So this user has the required permissions. Permission, I guess. So let's do a bit of a run just to see if we get a value back. Result. And if we run this for user 1, correct, true, this user has the required permissions. Fantastic. We also then want to create an instance though, if they don't have the correct permissions, what are we going to do then? So I can actually clone this same variable called result, and I can add this to the else path. Because this is a condition, it's only going to be true or false, meaning that the variable is only going to exist in either the then or the else. So when I reference the result variable after this conditional, it's either going to be one of these two options, but never both. So creating the same variable just means that regardless of the outcome, I can then use the information to be able to create logic off of that. So this is now in the else path. So this one is of course going to be a false value. Making sure we've selected the bool option here and not have the required permission. So if we select another user and we're still going to return this result variable, I think we have another user here, 5, which is false. This user does not have permission. We can actually check who the user was. So if we include our variable details, we can get in to see who was that user. Jessica from UIFlow, and Jessica's role was manager. So her permission value was 2. So the fact that it was less than the admin that was required, then we weren't able to have access to this function. However, if we also then updated the input to be that of a manager, we can now see that Jessica has access to this function. So this is our check user permissions function has now been created. We've got a inputs which we can pass in from an API, and we've now got the output being a true or a false value. So what we can do from this is we can then add this to an API. So for example, we were using our get contacts. So what we want to do with this is basically, like we've set up here, we can insert this custom function into an API. And we can see we've now got these inputs that we set in the function are now available to be used as part of our API that we set it in. So the user ID for this is, because it's an authentication required function, we can match it to that special auth ID. And then because it's an enum, when I click into this, what I really love about this is it gives me all the predefined options as to what I require. So we can say for this particular function, we need to have at least a user's permission to access the base data of this API. If we save this, and most importantly, I remember to update this function, otherwise that won't work. Matt's always got to remind me.
I missed it that time.
We now have essentially our APIs not just secured with authentication, we've also now got a function here set up. If we wanted to go one step further and just ensure that no matter what, we don't allow a user to proceed if they haven't got the correct permissions, we can also add one additional step here, which is a precondition. And the precondition is just a way of us flexibly controlling an error message just to ensure that the function doesn't pursue any further if the condition met isn't true. So with this, what we can do is we can have the result value, which is what we're receiving from the conditional, and it's going to be a result, funnily enough, .result, which is actually where we put the true false value because it's an object within this. And then the value needs to be true. If the value isn't true, then essentially we want to have an error message saying this user doesn't have the required permission, and we want this to be access denied as our error type. So that way we've now got
error type. Just want to clarify that kind of describes what message or what kind of message you get back from the API, correct?
Totally.
200 or
yeah, because sometimes, right, like you don't know what if you're new to this API, it's like what did I do wrong? was it the wrong credentials? Was it did I misform my JSON? It just gives them the best way to kind of give you some information that's close enough to find the thread. So whatever makes sense for the particular scenario, try to keep it obviously logical. And then within your error message, you can obviously give them more details. But if you're wanting to even be more verbose as well, you can actually include the full payload as well. So if we wanted to, we could actually include the entire result value in here as well. So that way, particularly if you need to do some further debugging, that payload's then accessible as part of that error.
Right.
So you can give them as much information as you want. And I'd recommend, unless it's client facing in some cases, the more the better to make it easier.
Yeah, especially for debugging.
Totally.
You can always take it away after.
Absolutely. So again, when you make changes, you want to make sure you publish those. And that's now set up. So testing this particular API, because it requires a particular permission, we have set up a few different users. Now, I know Sally is actually an unauthorized user. I think her account is suspended currently. So when we run this API now, which is what we've set up originally in our first call, we've got error code access denied. These users have the required permissions. However, if we upgrade to someone that does have permissions, so a manager or a user, we run this, we're now getting back all of our user details. And the good thing is because this is a custom function as mentioned, we can paste this same check onto any of our other APIs. And the difference is if it's an admin required function, we just check and select the required permission from here. So that's basically how we're going to configure the role-based access. So we've set up the database tables. We've updated our auth.me endpoint. So that way when the user logs in, we've got the role and the company they belong to. We've now created a custom check with a function to then be able to confirm what the user's role is. So I'll now pass it over to you, Matt, and I'll get you to show you how can we now use this information on the front end to create some conditional access to different functionality in the system.
Awesome. So now we're going to jump back into UIFlow, and we're going to start by looking at what data back, or the data we get back from that auth me endpoint that we just created in Lockly, with Lockly. So we're going to first go into our logic section here. And to see what data we get back, we want to test with a real user. So I'm going to click this live preview pop out. And because we have our authentication protection, it brings us to our login screen. So I'm just going to log in with that admin user. And I will click login. And then it's going to take me, and I'll see that I am getting data back. So I did log in successfully. But now if I go back into UIFlow, I can now see on it initialize, which is when it's checking our authentication, we can now see the auth info that we get back. And now we're seeing the additional data that we added on from the back end here. And what we really care about is the admin, or the name. And we want, for the future, we're going to grab the company name as well. So we can just check box, and then now we see we have access directly to those two data points directly in this authentication component. And one thing I would want to highlight here is that we're going to use a variable to now store this role, and we can use it throughout the other logic flows very easily and access it. So I'm going to go into our new variables header here, and I'm going to create a new variable, and I'm going to name this one just user underscore role. And I don't need a default value here, so I'm just going to leave it for that. And so now if I go back into pages, I'll see now I have a new global variable component here called user role. Now drag this one in, and I'm just going to clean this up. Do this. I'm only going to set this value. So whenever we go to this page and log in, we want to set the role, this global variable, to the role name. So what user role this has. And then that's going to allow us to now access this component or this role and get this value throughout our other logic flows. And the first thing that we want to do is to create a new logic flow. And how we mentioned is we want to have different permissions. We want to show different permissions to different user role levels. And so kind of at a high level, what we'll do is go back into the design space. And we're going to have 3 different functionalities, and then we'll connect those to the different roles. So the first one we'll do is drag in a button here, and I'm going to name this one add a contact. So I say add contact button, and I'm going to rename this one add contact button. It's for cleanliness here.
It's definitely a good habit to get into. I find it so much easier if you keep, when you're building your pulling your buttons and pulling all your components on, naming as you go just makes it so much easier to build logic with. So you're not looking at, is it button 1 or is it button 2 that I'm building the logic to?
Yeah, very much so. You don't have to recognize the specific order of the tree. The name is a lot easier.
Totally.
would definitely recommend. So that's kind of, at the high level. And then within each contact card, we're going to have a button for editing the contact. So edit, spell, edit contact. And then I'm just going to rename it up here as well. Edit contact. And I'm just going to duplicate this one. And this one's going to be, change the text to delete contact. And rename it. So delete contact. And just for sake of changing the color, so they're not the same, I'm just going to make it a really bright red.
Danger zone.
Danger zone. And I'll change the text to white as well. So kind of how we're going to do now is we're going to, depending on the user's role, we're going to display the ability to add additional contacts, to edit existing contacts, or delete specific contacts. And we're going to do that based on, like I said, from the auth information that we're now getting back to display each one of these components, these buttons. So the way that we do that is we're going to go back into the logic, and I'm going to create a new logic flow just in here and name this one role permissions. And so what we're going to do is now we're going to grab that user variable, that user role variable again here, because now we know that this is storing the specific role this user has. And the one component that we're going to do, because we're essentially doing conditional logic here, we're going to look for this switch component. And so what the switch component allows us to do, it allows us to kind of really easily construct specific conditional logics to say which state do we want to be showing to our user. And we do that based on the value that the user has. So what we're going to do here is click on our little gear state icon, and we're going to define each one of our, because it's an enum and we know what those finite values are, we can easily just add these finite cases. So we have admin, we have manager, and we have a user, I believe, not like that, user, suspended, and deactivated, I believe.
Yep,
is that
correct.
Right?
Perfect.
Yeah, activated. Perfect. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say when this user role value changes, so right when it gets set from the start, we're going to call this switch value, and we're going to pass in the role that we actually this user has. And then on this right side, we have this finite this list, and whichever value is called, it looks to this right side, this output, and whichever one it matches, that's the logic trigger that is going to happen. And so we can do some tests here. So let's say for the manager and the user, we don't want to allow them to add any context. So for this button container is our high level, has our add contact button. I'm going to say for the managers, we're going to deactivate that container. And for the users, we're also going to deactivate this container. And so I'm just going to eliminate that. And so that's one, and we can do some tests on this, but that's just for the high level button container. Now we actually also want to do the same kind of logic within the collection card itself. So inside for each one of those cards, we need to drag in our collection, which is that repeating group. But first, I'm going to copy both of these, user role and the switch, just because I'm going to reuse this logic. And I'm going to paste it inside of this collection. And we want to do that because this is where we have our edit contact button and our delete contact buttons. So I'm going to drag in my edit contact button and my delete contact button. And I'm going to open up our action. So by default, all of our buttons, we have click on click. But right now, we really want the activate and deactivate actions. I'm going to do that for the delete contact as well. Just going to add these activate and deactivates. And so we're going to do this the same idea here is for the, let's say for the users, we want read only. So we're going to have the edit contacts deactivated, and we're going to have the delete contacts also deactivated. And then for the managers, we're going to allow the ability to edit, but not delete. So we're going to activate the edit contact button and deactivate our delete contact button. And then for admins, we're going to activate both. So we're just going to have both of those activated. So that's kind of at a high level. So we can now kind of test our different roles here. And I'm going to do that in this pop-up window. So this live pop out. First, I'm going to log out. And so I think we mentioned that Jessica is a
manager.
So we would expect her to
edit
be
contacts?
able to edit contacts, but not delete them.
Yep, and not add contacts either, I think.
And not on cat. Yeah, correct.
I mean, the good thing is this is a scenario as well, but the function allows you to kind of, again, conditionally show whatever you want based on how it's going to make sense for your application.
Exactly. And because all of them still are above the user levels, we are still getting data back. So we'll see that we now have all of our contacts and we have the ability to edit, but not the delete. We don't have the add contact button either.
Got it.
So that's for Jessica. So we can see that the manager level is working.
Now we
So
had
log out.
Sally was an interesting one. Now Sally was didn't have was actually deactivated or suspended. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with this one because we've now changed the way that Xano is functioning. So
yeah, and so Sally is going to be one. We didn't set up any of the specific suspended or deactivated logic to show like a modal that says, hey, this, but to your point, the data should still be protected because of the user enum here. So if we log in, we should get no data showing, which is correct.
So they're not a user, they're deactivated or suspended. So that Xano is now blocking that function because we've, if we went in to debug what's happening with that request now, we're going to have that error access denied as the item instead of getting back the results. So we now know that Xano is correctly set up to block the data from an API level, but then the conditions we're adding, we can still control more on the front end as well.
Yeah, so let's take that scenario and let's go back into design. So let's say we want to, for that that user, we want to actually show them a specific little modal that says, hey, contact your administrator. So I'm going to slide over from in our design and go into our patterns. And there's a little missions dialog. And so what we're going to do now is go into our logic here. And now I have this permissions modal in my design that I just added in. So I'm going to add this one in. Going to now say, hey, if you're suspended or deactivated, we're going to open up this modal.
Really like that switch functionality. Makes it so easy just to kind of match those different items.
Yeah, especially when in conjunction with the enums and where there's a finite, it makes it really easy to really see which flows you want to have happen. And so now let's try again. Let's say Sally. There we go. So now we are still seeing the node data, but we just have a little pop-up here that says, hey, your account has been suspended. Contact your admin for permissions. And so you would have complete control to design how this modal looks or what you want to show. But yeah, it's just a little another item here.
And one last item, Matt, if we were looking to just stop access to this page altogether and create a redirect, how would that happen?
Yeah, so just as in our home page, if we go to our home page dropdown, our configure page, we have this authentication and we're securing this page. So if I were to do another test to make sure that our auth is still there. I didn't log out. So let's just do, oh yeah, so I believe we're logged out now. Let's try this. So this is our admin. So I logged in myself and now I can see how we have the edit, we have the delete, and we have the adding contacts. So we have all that functionality for the admins. But going back to walking your point here, so I'm going to log out and now I'm in the login here. So if I were to try to go directly to this home page, it's going to redirect
setup. Okay. So now we're secured on our pages with the base authentication, and then we've got the controls on each page set up based on the role-based access as well. So we're fully authenticated and protected based on how we want to set up our application.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just that one little, I can add one little part that we did with the company name. So we can add some small personalizations here. So I'm going to do the same thing I did with user role. Add another global variable here. Just name it user company. And take out a default there. So I have my user company now. And so I'm just going to drag that one in to clean that one up. So we're going to save off the role and the company name. And now I'm just going to simply create a new logic flow. I'm just going to name this one welcome. And what we're going to do is we have that kind of header text up at the design, and we have our user company. So we have this info, we have our information about the user's company. And I'm going to use our string template component. So this allows us to really also customize that specific message that we want to show. And so in this gear icon, we can say hello, or we can say welcome to, and then you'll see the syntax is green. And so that's the notation that we're going to dynamically pass in and fill in what this variable is. So the value that we're going to pass in is the company name into this name. And then we're going to say, when that's changed, we're going to set our text label. We're going to send that text the actual template. So now if I were to go back in our preview and log in, I'll now say welcome to UIFlow. So it's grabbing that company name and kind of personalizing it there.
Starting to look like an application.
It's getting there. Yeah, absolutely. We have the functionalities. It's all there.
It's all coming together. Oh, awesome, Matt. Thanks so much for showing us through that. So I think we've now got authentication covered. Please let us know if there's some additional items you'd like to see or things we didn't cover in this episode today. We're covering a lot more items in the next episodes with some more advanced screens and maybe some more complex logic. So we're going to stay tuned for the next episode. But for today, thank you so much for your time, Matt, and look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Take care. See you.